The marble halls of the Galactic Council chambers had witnessed countless negotiations, treaties, and declarations over the past 3 millennia. Today, however, the tension crackling through the air felt different. Ambassador Veltar of the Zephyrian Collective adjusted his ceremonial robes as he prepared to deliver what he believed would be humanity's final ultimatum. The humans sat at their designated table with an unsettling calmness. Their delegation consisted of only 5 individuals, a laughably small number compared to the dozens of representatives from other species. The lead human, a woman named Director Sarah Chen, wore a simple black suit that seemed almost primitive compared to the elaborate garments of other delegates. Her eyes, however, held something that made even the battle-hardened Krillian warriors shift uncomfortably in their seats. "The matter before us today is simple," Veltar began, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "The human species has been expanding aggressively through sectors 7 through 12, establishing colonies without proper authorization from this council. This expansion threatens the established order that has maintained peace for over 2,000 years. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled delegates. The insectoid hive queen clicked her mandibles approvingly, while the crystalline beings from Altara Prime hummed in harmonic consensus. It was a familiar scene. The established powers presenting a united front against an upstart species that dared to challenge the status quo. Director Chen remained motionless, her fingers steepled before her on the polished table. The other human delegates, a man in military dress, another woman with the bearing of a scientist, and 2 individuals whose roles weren't immediately apparent, sat with the same eerie stillness. Furthermore, Veltar continued, warming to his subject, intelligence reports indicate that humans possess an unusual capacity for violence. While this might serve them well in conflicts with primitive species, they must understand that war against the combined might of the Galactic Council would be inadvisable. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the council chambers. The draconian representative, General Thexmore, leaned forward with predatory interest. His species had conquered 17 star systems through sheer military might, and the thought of breaking another upstart civilization appealed to his warrior nature. "We have observed human military exercises," Thexmore added, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "While their tactics show some creativity, their numbers are insufficient, their technology primitive by our standards. A single draconian battle fleet could reduce their home system to cosmic dust within a matter of days." The ethereal consortium's representative, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline form, pulsed with what their species considered laughter. "Our psychic analysis indicates that humans experience fear and self-preservation instincts much like other organic species. Surely they will see reason when faced with overwhelming opposition." Director Chen finally moved, leaning back slightly in her chair. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the chamber despite its conversational tone. "Gentlemen, ladies, and beings of various configurations, I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about human nature." The casual way she addressed the assembled representatives, some of whom commanded fleets capable of sterilizing planets, sent a chill through the chamber. This was not how lesser species typically spoke to the council. "You speak of our expansion as aggressive," Chen continued, "but we prefer to think of it as enthusiastic. You mention our military capabilities as primitive, which is an interesting perspective from species who haven't faced a real threat to their existence in centuries." Veltar's tentacles writhed with barely contained irritation. "Are you suggesting that humanity poses a threat to this council? Your species has been aware of galactic civilization for less than 50 standard years. We have maintained order among the stars for millennia." "Order," Chen repeated as if tasting the word. "Yes, I can see how you might value that. Predictability. Status quo. Everyone in their designated place following the rules established by those who came before." She stood slowly, and despite her relatively small stature compared to many of the alien delegates, her presence seemed to fill the chamber. "But here's what you may have missed in your intelligence reports about human nature. We don't actually fear war. We fear boredom. We fear stagnation. We fear being told that we can't explore, can't grow, can't push beyond the boundaries that others have accepted as permanent." The military officer at the human table, Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, according to the briefing materials, shifted slightly. It wasn't much, but every predator species in the chamber recognized the movement of a hunter preparing to strike. You've built your galactic order on the assumption that rational beings will always choose survival over conflict, Chen said, walking slowly around her table. It's a reasonable assumption. Most species, when faced with overwhelming force, will negotiate, compromise, or submit. It's logical. It's sensible. It's what any rational civilization would do. She paused at the edge of the human delegation area, her hands clasped behind her back. The problem with that assumption is that humans aren't entirely rational. We have this quirk in our psychology that becomes more pronounced when we're threatened. We call it spite. The chamber had grown uncomfortably quiet. Even the ambient hum of life support systems seemed muted. When you tell a human they can't do something, when you threaten them with consequences for pursuing their goals, when you attempt to force them into submission through displays of superior power, well, that's when things get interesting. General Thexmore rose from his seat, his massive frame towering over the chamber. Are you threatening this council, human? Chen turned to face him directly, and for a moment, the two beings, one a product of millions of years of apex predator evolution, the other a descendant of persistence hunters who had conquered their homeworld through sheer stubbornness, stared at each other across the space between species. General, Chen said with a smile that held no warmth whatsoever, I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply providing context for what's about to happen next. The lights in the chamber suddenly dimmed as incoming priority communications flooded the council's networks. Emergency alerts began flashing on displays throughout the hall as delegates frantically accessed reports from across the galaxy. Chen returned to her seat with unhurried steps. 3 hours ago, while we've been having this delightful conversation, the first wave of human colonial expeditions launched from 57 different systems. Each expedition consists of approximately 10,000 volunteers, supported by our newest class of exploration vessels. Chaos erupted in the chamber as delegates shouted over each other, demanding explanations, issuing threats, calling for immediate military response. Through it all, the 5 humans sat in perfect calm, watching the panic unfold with expressions of polite interest. The Galactic Council had just learned their first lesson about humanity. When faced with overwhelming odds and threatened with destruction, humans don't retreat, they multiply. Emergency Session Protocol 7 had never been invoked in the Council's 3,000-year history. The Great Chamber, usually a showcase of diplomatic grandeur, now resembled a war room. Holographic displays showed star maps dotted with rapidly multiplying red indicators, each one representing a human colonial fleet that had seemingly materialized from nowhere. Admiral Kethvar of the Hegemony Navy studied the tactical displays with growing concern. His species had evolved from pack hunters, and his instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with this picture. These numbers don't make sense, he muttered to his aide. How does a species with fewer than 30 settled worlds suddenly deploy this many vessels? The human delegation had been escorted to a secure holding area, though escorted was perhaps too generous a term for what amounted to 5 humans walking calmly while surrounded by a full squad of Krelian guards. Director Chen had submitted to the security measures with the same unsettling composure she'd displayed throughout the proceedings. General Thexmore paced before the central display like a caged predator. The solution is obvious. We deploy the 3rd and 7th battle fleets to intercept these colonial ships before they can establish footholds. Destroy a few dozen vessels and the humans will remember their place. With respect, General, came a synthetic voice from the corner. Preliminary scans indicate these aren't standard colonial vessels. The speaker was X7, the Council's chief military analyst and one of the few artificial intelligences granted full membership. Its form resembled a floating geometric sculpture, but its tactical acumen was legendary. The energy signatures are unusual. Before Thexmore could respond, the chamber's communication array erupted with incoming priority signals. The first came from Outpost Kepler 442, a routine monitoring station on the edge of human space. Council Command, this is Station Commander Yalthek. I'm not sure how to report this. A human vessel just translated into our system. It's requesting permission to dock for routine diplomatic consultation. The ship appears to be a civilian transport, but our sensors are detecting some very non-civilian modifications. The second signal originated from the draconian fortress world of Keth Prime. This is Base Commander Mordak. 3 human ships have entered our outer system. They claim to be conducting scientific surveys of local stellar phenomena. When we ordered them to leave, they replied that they were in international space and would continue their research. Sir, they're not wrong about the territorial boundaries, but their research equipment includes what appears to be a full-spectrum sensor array, capable of mapping our entire defensive grid. More reports flooded in over the next hour. Human ships were appearing throughout Council space, not in attack formations but scattered in 1s and 2s across dozens of systems. Each vessel claimed innocent purposes: scientific research, diplomatic missions, trade expeditions, or simple navigational errors. None appeared to be military vessels, but X7's analysis revealed that the distinction might be irrelevant. They've weaponized their civilian fleet, X7 announced to the assembled delegates. Every modification appears designed for multi-role capability. A scientific vessel that can transform into a combat platform, a diplomatic ship carrying enough firepower to engage a frigate, a mining vessel with military-grade armor and weapon systems. Ambassador Veltar's tentacles writhed with agitation. This is clearly a violation of every established military protocol. Civilian vessels should not possess such capabilities. Actually, interjected Director Chen's voice from the secure holding area. Somehow she had managed to access the communication system. There's nothing in Galactic law preventing civilian vessels from being well-equipped for frontier exploration. Space is dangerous after all. Pirates, hostile wildlife, unstable stellar phenomena. A responsible government ensures its citizens can defend themselves. The implications hit the delegates like a cold wave. If every human civilian ship was potentially a warship, then the distinction between their military and civilian fleets became meaningless. The Council's traditional strategy of targeting military assets while preserving civilian populations would be impossible to implement. Colonel Rodriguez's voice joined the transmission. Besides, we learned a long time ago that in space the difference between a cargo hauler and a warship is mostly about what you load in the holds. Funny how perspective changes things. General Thexmore roared his frustration. Enough of this deception. Deploy the fleets. Destroy these ships before they can establish whatever foothold they're attempting. I wouldn't recommend that course of action, X7 stated quietly. Analysis of the human ship distribution pattern suggests this is not a random deployment. They're positioning assets for mutual support networks. Attacking any single group will trigger a coordinated response from vessels across multiple sectors. As if to emphasize the point, another transmission arrived from Admiral Kethvar's own flagship. Sir, we've detected 17 human vessels in our patrol zone. They're maintaining standard commercial flight paths, but, Admiral, they're flying in formation. Not obviously, but the pattern is unmistakable to anyone with tactical training. It's like they're daring us to make the first move. In the Ethereal Consortium's home system, similar reports painted an equally troubling picture. The energy beings prided themselves on their ability to detect deception and hidden intentions, but the humans presented a confusing mixture of genuine civilian activity and obvious military preparation. Director Chen's voice came through the comm system again, this time with a hint of amusement. Gentlemen, I think there's been another misunderstanding. You seem to believe that we're trying to hide our military capabilities. Actually, we're showing them to you quite openly. The chamber fell silent as the implication sank in. The human deployment wasn't an invasion, it was a demonstration. They were proving that they could place assets anywhere in Council space anytime they chose, using methods that the established military doctrines couldn't effectively counter. Every one of those ships you're tracking contains volunteers, Chen continued. People who left their homes, their families, their comfortable lives because someone told them they couldn't explore the galaxy freely. Do you know what we call people like that on Earth? Marines. The word didn't translate well into most galactic languages, but X7 quickly provided context from human databases. The definition that appeared on the displays made several delegates step back in alarm. Elite military infantry trained for rapid deployment, amphibious assault, and operations in hostile territory. Historical designation for forces considered expendable in service of strategic objectives. But these are civilian vessels, Feltar protested weakly. Every human civilian has completed basic military training, Rodriguez explained matter-of-factly. Mandatory service, cross-training in multiple specialties, regular refresher courses. Our farmers know small unit tactics. Our teachers can field strip weapons blindfolded. Our children learn to march before they learn to read. The revelation hit the council like a physical blow. They weren't facing a traditional military force with clear command structures and predictable tactics. They were confronting an entire species that had militarized its civilian population to a degree that blurred the line between combatant and non-combatant beyond recognition. Admiral Kethvar finally voiced what everyone was thinking. How do you fight an enemy where every citizen is a potential soldier and every civilian ship is a potential warship? Chen's answer came through the speakers with crystalline clarity. You don't fight them. You accommodate them. Or you discover just how creative humans can get when someone tries to stop them from going where they want to go. The first phase of the human response was complete. The Council now understood that their conventional military advantages meant nothing against an opponent who had fundamentally reimagined the nature of space-based conflict. The second phase was about to begin. The war room beneath the Council chambers had been designed to coordinate responses to galactic-scale threats. Never in its architect's wildest calculations had they imagined it would be used to track a species that treated interstellar warfare like a particularly aggressive colonization effort. Admiral Kethvar stood before a three-dimensional holographic display that showed the current positions of human vessels throughout Council space. What had started as scattered red dots 12 hours ago now resembled a metastasizing infection. Each ship that had initially appeared alone was now accompanied by 2 or 3 others, and those groups were beginning to link up into larger formations. They're not attacking our military assets, reported Captain Zexhai, a young Krillian officer whose clan had served the Council for generations. They're completely ignoring our patrol fleets and defensive installations. Instead, they're establishing supply caches, setting up communication relays, and, sir, they're building infrastructure. XE7's geometric form shifted as it processed incoming data streams. Confirmed. The humans are implementing what their historical records term island hopping strategy. Rather than engaging our superior numbers directly, they're creating a network of mutually supporting positions that will be extremely difficult to dislodge individually. General Thexmore's claws scraped against the metal of his chair. Then we coordinate a simultaneous strike against all positions. Overwhelming force applied at once across multiple sectors. Logistically impossible, X7 responded immediately. Our fleet assets are designed for sequential engagement scenarios, not coordinated attacks across 17 different sectors simultaneously. Moreover, preliminary analysis suggests the humans have positioned their assets specifically to prevent such coordination. The truth was becoming unavoidably clear. The Galactic Council's military might, overwhelming in any single engagement, was being systematically neutralized by an opponent who refused to engage in single engagements. Ambassador Veltar reviewed reports from his intelligence network with growing unease. These human civilians are not behaving like any refugee population we've encountered. They're not seeking sanctuary or negotiating for territory. They're settling, as if they own the space they're occupying. The most disturbing reports came from systems where human groups had made contact with local populations. Rather than the conquest and subjugation the Council expected, the humans were trading, sharing technology, and in some cases, recruiting. Sir? Captain Zexhai announced, his voice tight with controlled alarm. We're receiving a transmission from the Kalani colony in the Vega Proxima system. They're requesting permission to form a mutual defense alliance with the humans who've established a research station in their outer system. The Kalani were a peaceful, agricultural species that had never shown interest in military affairs. The idea of them voluntarily allying with the humans sent shockwaves through the command structure. What could they possibly gain from such an alliance? Veltar demanded. The answer came in the form of a data packet transmitted directly from the Kalani colonial administrator. The humans had shared water purification technology that increased agricultural yields by 40%. They'd provided medical treatments for diseases that had plagued the colony for decades. Most importantly, they'd offered to train Kalani volunteers in self-defense techniques. They're not conquering, X7 observed with what might have been admiration in an artificial intelligence. They're recruiting. Every species they encounter becomes a potential ally rather than a subject population. The implications were staggering. The Council's authority had always rested on their ability to provide protection and stability to member species. If humans could offer the same benefits while also providing advanced technology and military training, the Council's value proposition suddenly seemed less compelling. General Thexmore stood abruptly. Enough speculation. Deploy the 7th Battle Fleet to the Vega Proxima system. We'll eliminate the human presence there and remind the Kalani where their loyalties should lie. Sir? Captain Zexhi's voice carried a note of barely suppressed panic. The 7th Fleet is reporting unusual contact from human vessels. They're not attacking, but they're following. Every time one of our ships changes course, human vessels adjust their positions to maintain escort formation. Admiral Kethvar felt the cold touch of tactical nightmare becoming reality. How many human ships? Approximately 200, sir. All civilian marked. They're not making any threatening moves, just staying close. The brilliance of the tactic was immediately apparent to every military mind in the room. The humans had effectively taken the 7th Fleet hostage without firing a shot. Any engagement would involve fighting through a cloud of supposedly civilian vessels, creating a propaganda disaster and tactical nightmare simultaneously. X7's analysis confirmed their worst fears. Similar patterns are emerging around all major fleet concentrations. The humans have deployed surveillance and escort groups around every significant Council military asset. They're not preventing our ships from moving, but they're ensuring that any military action will be highly visible and involve potential civilian casualties. Director Chen's voice suddenly filled the war room, transmitted from her holding cell with crystalline clarity. Gentlemen, you seem surprised by our tactics, but this is standard human doctrine. We call it aggressive friendship. When someone threatens us, we get closer to them, not farther away. This is not friendship, Thexmore growled. This is psychological warfare. From our perspective, there's very little difference, Colonel Rodriguez's voice joined the transmission. Humans have always believed that the best way to handle a dangerous neighbor is to know everything about them. Your fleets are no longer operating in secret. Your tactical capabilities are being observed and catalogued. Your response times are being measured. We're learning. The Council delegates exchanged alarmed glances. Military effectiveness depended heavily on unpredictability and operational security. If the humans could monitor and analyze every Council fleet movement in real time, their numerical superiority became far less meaningful. What do you want? Admiral Kethvar asked, his voice heavy with the resignation of a career military officer recognizing a no-win scenario. Chen's response came with the same unsettling calm she'd maintained throughout the crisis. Admiral, we want exactly what we said from the beginning. We want to explore. We want to settle new worlds. We want to meet new species and form relationships with them. We want to push the boundaries of what's possible. And if the Council refuses to permit such expansion, then we'll do it anyway. But we'll be disappointed in your lack of vision. The casual dismissal of Council authority sent another wave of shock through the war room. These humans weren't rebels or revolutionaries driven by ideology. They were explorers and pioneers who viewed the Council's opposition as an inconvenience rather than a legitimate obstacle. X7's analysis took on an increasingly urgent tone. Additional data suggests this deployment represents only the first wave of human expansion. Intelligence indicates they have the manufacturing capacity to sustain this level of deployment indefinitely, potentially increasing the rate of expansion by an order of magnitude within standard months. The terrifying mathematics were becoming clear. The humans weren't launching a single military campaign that could be defeated and ended. They were implementing a strategy of perpetual expansion that would continue until either they achieved their objectives or every human in their space was eliminated. And as the reports from systems throughout the galaxy continued to arrive, it was becoming obvious that elimination might not be possible. The humans had dispersed themselves too widely, embedded themselves too deeply within existing populations, and created too many relationships with local species. The Council had always maintained order through the threat of overwhelming retaliation. But how do you retaliate against a species that has made itself indispensable to dozens of other civilizations? The answer, Admiral Kethvar realized with growing dread, was that you didn't. You adapted. or you watched your authority crumble as former allies found better partners among the newcomers. The humans had turned first contact into a recruitment drive, and they were winning. The diplomatic quarter of the council station had never hosted so many emergency meetings simultaneously. In private chambers throughout the sector, individual species representatives huddled with their advisors, trying to comprehend how their carefully maintained galactic order had unraveled in less than 72 hours. Ambassador Veltar found himself in the unprecedented position of fielding communications from colony worlds that were openly questioning council policy. The Zephyrian Collective had built its reputation on careful, measured responses to galactic events. Now their colonies were sending messages that bordered on insubordination. The humans have offered to share their atmospheric processing technology, reported Governor Nalshin from the struggling colony of Kepler 438b. Our yields could increase by 300%. Our respiratory illness rates could drop to near zero. Ambassador, with respect, what exactly has the Council offered us in exchange for our loyalty beyond the promise that we won't be attacked by species that weren't threatening us anyway? Similar messages were flooding in from across Zephyrian space. The humans weren't making formal diplomatic overtures. They were simply sharing technology, offering assistance, and asking for nothing in return except the right to establish research stations and supply depots. It was, Veltar realized, the most effective diplomatic strategy he'd ever witnessed. In the Draconian Empire's private chambers, General Thexmore was discovering that his warrior culture's straightforward approach to problem-solving had significant limitations when dealing with opponents who refused to fight. Conventionally, sir, reported Captain Morthek, his voice carrying the frustration of a predator denied prey. The humans in our territory are requesting permission to establish cultural exchange programs with our frontier garrisons. They want to share combat techniques and compare military traditions. Obviously a reconnaissance mission, Thexmore growled. Yes, sir, but our garrison commanders are interested. The humans have been analyzing our tactical doctrines and have apparently identified several areas where cross-training could improve effectiveness. They're offering to share advanced close-quarters combat techniques in exchange for lessons in large-scale formation fighting. The general's claws extended involuntarily. The Draconian military had stagnated over centuries of unchallenged dominance. The prospect of learning new combat techniques from a species that had impressed even X7 with their tactical creativity was undeniably appealing to warriors bred for conflict. They're trying to infiltrate our military structure, he stated, but his tone lacked conviction. Perhaps, sir, but if they are, they're doing it by making our forces more effective. The preliminary training sessions have already resulted in measurable improvements in small unit coordination. Across the station, the Ethereal Consortium was grappling with an even more fundamental challenge. As beings of pure psychic energy, they had always prided themselves on their ability to understand the motivations and intentions of organic species. The humans, however, presented a cognitive puzzle that defied their analytical frameworks. Their mental patterns are unlike anything in our databases, reported Consciousness Prime Zarathul to the assembled consortium leadership. They appear to be simultaneously planning for violent conflict and genuine peaceful cooperation. Both intentions exist in their minds at the same time without creating cognitive dissonance. That should be psychologically impossible, responded Consciousness Secondary Helvar. Organic minds cannot maintain contradictory objectives without experiencing mental breakdown. Yet they do. They are preparing for war while genuinely hoping for peace. They are planning conquest while sincerely offering friendship. They are utterly ruthless in their strategic thinking while being genuinely compassionate in their individual interactions. The implications were troubling for a species that had built their galactic influence on their ability to predict and manipulate the behavior of other civilizations. If human psychology operated outside the established parameters, then the consortium's most fundamental advantages became useless. Meanwhile, in the secure holding area, the human delegation was having their own meeting. Despite being supposedly imprisoned, they had somehow managed to maintain communication with their deployed forces and were coordinating activities across dozens of star systems from their detention. Cells, Phase 3 is proceeding ahead of schedule, reported Dr. Sarah Kim, the scientist whose role in the delegation had initially seemed peripheral. The Kalani Agricultural Alliance has encouraged similar approaches from the Vorthan miners and the Nexus Trade Federation. We're seeing cascade recruitment effects across 7 different species. Colonel Rodriguez nodded approvingly. The cultural exchange programs are exceeding expectations. Turns out warriors from different species have more in common than their politicians do. We're building personal relationships at the military level that will persist regardless of official policy changes. Director Chen reviewed the data streaming to her personal device with satisfaction. The beauty of this approach is that we're not forcing anyone to choose sides. We're simply offering better alternatives and letting rational self-interest do the work. The council members are starting to panic, observed Agent Thompson, one of the 2 delegation members whose roles had remained mysterious. Intelligence intercepts indicate they're considering increasingly desperate measures. Expected, Chen replied. Established power structures always react poorly to disruption. The question is whether they'll adapt or escalate. Their answer came sooner than expected. Emergency klaxons began sounding throughout the station, as Admiral Kethvar's voice echoed through the communication systems. All Council forces are to implement Protocol Omega immediately. Any human vessels that refuse direct orders to leave Council space are to be considered hostile and engaged with lethal force. Any Council member species providing aid or comfort to human forces will be considered in violation of their membership agreements. The declaration sent shockwaves through every delegation on the station. Protocol Omega had been designed as a last resort against existential threats to galactic civilization. Using it against a species that had yet to fire a single shot in anger seemed like massive overreaction. But Admiral Kethvar was beyond caring about proportional response. 3 days of human expansion had demonstrated that conventional military thinking was inadequate against opponents who had weaponized diplomacy and turned first contact into a recruitment drive. Sir, Captain Zexai's voice carried barely controlled panic. We're receiving responses from human vessels throughout the galaxy. They're not leaving. Then destroy them. Sir, that's going to be difficult. Every human vessel is currently positioned near civilian populations or in systems with active council member colonies. Engaging them will inevitably result in collateral damage to the very species we're trying to protect. The tactical nightmare was complete. The humans had positioned themselves so that any military action against them would harm innocent civilians, creating a propaganda disaster and potentially turning council member species against their own government. Director Chen's voice cut through the chaos with infuriating calm. Admiral, you might want to reconsider that order. You're about to turn a diplomatic dispute into the first galactic civil war in 3 millennia. You are in no position to make threats, human. I'm not making threats. I'm making observations. You have approximately 47 species in your space that are currently hosting human research teams, benefiting from human technology, or participating in human cultural exchange programs. If you attack human vessels, you'll be attacking their friends and allies. How do you think they'll respond? The question hung in the air like a poison cloud. The Council's authority had always depended on the consent of its member species. If those species began to view Council military actions as attacks on their benefactors and allies, the entire power structure could collapse. Admiral Kethvar realized he was facing a choice between watching the Council's authority erode gradually as species defected to the human sphere of influence, or triggering an immediate crisis that could destroy the galactic order entirely. Either way, the humans had already won. They had transformed a military confrontation into a political revolution, and they had done it without firing a single shot. The age of Council dominance was ending, and the age of human expansion was just beginning. Lasted exactly 17 seconds. Then the communication boards in the Council war room exploded with incoming transmissions from across the galaxy, and it became clear that the humans had forced a choice that would reshape galactic civilization. The first response came from the Kalani Colonial Administration in Vega Proxima. Council Command, this is Governor Tal Nesh. We formally request that you rescind your attack order against human vessels in our system. These individuals are our invited guests and are providing vital humanitarian assistance. Any military action against them will be considered an act of aggression against Kalani sovereign territory. Admiral Kethavar's mandibles clicked in disbelief. The Kalani had never shown backbone in their 3 centuries of Council membership. They were peaceful farmers who had traditionally deferred to council authority on all military matters. The second transmission arrived from the Vorthan Mining Collective. Council fleet elements are ordered to maintain minimum safe distance from human vessels operating in our territory. We are exercising our rights under Treaty Section 847B to defend our contracted partners against unprovoked aggression. Contracted partners? General Thexmore's roar echoed through the chamber. When did the humans become contracted partners? X7's response carried a note of what might have been mechanical admiration. Approximately 6 hours ago, when the Vorthan leadership signed mutual assistance agreements with human engineering teams. The humans have been offering advanced mining technology in exchange for mineral extraction rights. The agreements are completely legal under existing council trade law. More transmissions flooded in as the true scope of human diplomatic success became apparent. Species after species declared their intention to protect human vessels in their territory, defend human research stations, and honor agreements signed in the past 72 hours. Captain Zexhi's voice grew increasingly strained as he relayed each new declaration. Sir, the Nexus Trade Federation has issued a statement declaring human vessels to be under their commercial protection. The Altaran crystal growers are claiming human atmospheric specialists as essential personnel. Sir, even the Hive Queen is requesting that we avoid military action that might disrupt human biological research in her territory. The Hive Queen's declaration sent shockwaves through the chamber. Her species had been among the most vocal supporters of aggressive action against human expansion. The idea that she would suddenly reverse position seemed impossible. What could the humans possibly offer a hive-mind species? Veltar demanded. The answer came in a data burst from the Queen herself. Human xenobiologists had identified solutions to reproductive problems that had plagued her species for generations. Birth rates in systems with human research teams had increased by 200% in just 3 days. They're not just recruiting allies, X7 observed with mechanical precision. They're solving problems. Every species they contact receives immediate, tangible benefits from the relationship. They're not asking for loyalty, they're earning it. In the secure holding area, Director Chen watched the cascade of declarations with quiet satisfaction. This was the moment she'd been planning for since the first human scout ships had encountered Council patrol fleets 3 months earlier. The beautiful thing about building relationships based on mutual benefit, she explained to her fellow delegates, is that people will fight to protect them. The Council built their authority on the threat of violence. We're building ours on the promise of partnership. Colonel Rodriguez was monitoring military communications across the galaxy. Council fleet commanders are reporting massive confusion in their ranks. Many crews include personnel from species that have declared human vessels under their protection. They're being asked to fire on ships that their own governments consider allies. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly for Council forces. Mixed species crews were experiencing internal conflicts as members received contradictory orders from their home governments and the Council command structure. Admiral Kethvar found himself in command of fleets whose loyalty was fracturing along species lines. Draconian crews remained disciplined, but Kalani communications officers were refusing to relay targeting data for human vessels. Vortan engineers were reporting mysterious technical difficulties with weapons systems when ordered to engage human ships near mining operations. This is mutiny, General Thexmore declared, but his words lacked conviction. It wasn't mutiny in any traditional sense, it was the collision of conflicting loyalties that the Council's structure had never been designed to handle. The crisis deepened when reports arrived from the frontier systems. Human vessels weren't just defending themselves. They were actively rescuing Council personnel whose ships had suffered mechanical failures or been damaged in accidents. Human medical teams were treating injured Council crew members. Human engineers were repairing Council vessels stranded by equipment failures. Sir, Captain Zexhi's voice had taken on a tone of barely controlled hysteria. The humans are providing humanitarian aid to our own forces. Draconian battlecruiser Morthak reports that human engineers have repaired critical life support systems after a cascade failure. The crew is grateful. The word grateful hung in the air like an accusation. Council military doctrine had always emphasized self-reliance and species superiority. The idea of elite draconian warriors being grateful to humans for rescue was psychologically devastating to the command structure. Dr. Kim's voice drifted from the holding area with clinical precision. Basic human psychology, gentlemen. When someone saves your life, you tend to view them more favorably regardless of previous conflicts. We call it the rescue response, and it's remarkably consistent across species. The humans had weaponized compassion, turning every emergency response into a recruitment opportunity and every act of assistance into a diplomatic victory. Ambassador Veltar finally voiced what everyone in the war room was thinking. How do we fight an enemy that makes our own forces like them? You don't fight them, Director Chen responded through the communication system. You join them, or you watch your civilization tear itself apart trying to maintain divisions that no longer serve anyone's interests. The moment of truth arrived when Admiral Kethavar received a priority transmission from his own flagship. Commander Velkar, a hegemony officer whose family had served the Council for 12 generations, appeared on the main display with obvious reluctance. Admiral, I must report a developing situation. Human vessels have taken up positions throughout our patrol sector. They're not threatening us, but they're present. My crew is split between following Council orders and, Sir, 3 human ships just responded to our distress call from the merchant vessel Prosperity's Dream. They've rescued 17 civilians from life pod failures that our own response teams couldn't reach in time. The implications were staggering. Council forces were becoming dependent on human assistance for basic humanitarian operations. Each rescue, each act of aid, each moment of cooperation was eroding the psychological barriers that made military conflict possible. Sir, Commander Velkar continued, his voice heavy with conflict. My crew is asking why we're preparing to attack the ships that just saved 17 of our people. It was the question that had no good answer. Admiral Kethvar realized that the humans had created a scenario where any military action would be viewed by his own forces as betrayal of those who had helped. General Thexmore made one final attempt to salvage the situation. Deploy the Omega Protocol fleet. Pure Draconian crews, no mixed personnel. They'll follow orders regardless of political complications. I'm afraid that won't be possible, X7 interjected. The Omega Protocol fleet is currently indisposed. Every delegate in the room turned to stare at the artificial intelligence. X7's geometric form shifted patterns rapidly as it processed incoming data. Clarification: the Omega Protocol fleet has been surrounded by approximately 300 human civilian vessels. The humans are not threatening violence, but they are requesting permission to conduct cultural exchange tours of Draconian military vessels. The fleet commander reports that his warriors are curious about human military traditions. The final piece of the human strategy clicked into place. They hadn't just neutralized Council military superiority. They had turned it into a recruitment opportunity. Even the most disciplined warrior species in the galaxy wanted to learn from opponents who had demonstrated such tactical brilliance. Admiral Kethvar slowly lowered himself into his command chair, the weight of inevitable defeat settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. The humans had accomplished something that had never been achieved in galactic history. They had won a war without fighting it. What are your terms? He asked quietly. Director Chen's response came immediately, as if she had been waiting for exactly this question. No terms, Admiral. No surrender, no occupation, no territorial concessions. We just want to explore, learn, and grow alongside everyone else. The galaxy is big enough for all of us to thrive. The simplicity of the response was more devastating than any demand for unconditional surrender could have been. The humans weren't conquering the Council. They were making it irrelevant. As reports continued to flood in from across the O. 6 weeks after what historians would later call the Bloodless Revolution, the Galactic Council chambers hosted their first truly democratic session in 3 millennia. The marble halls that had once echoed with imperial declarations now buzzed with collaborative discussion between species that had discovered they had more in common than their governments had ever admitted. Director Chen stood at what had once been the human delegation table. But the formal seating arrangements had been abandoned in favor of a circular configuration that put no species at the head of the assembly. The change in layout reflected a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization approached decision-making. The infrastructure projects are proceeding ahead of schedule, she reported to the mixed assembly of council members, human representatives, and delegates from newly independent colonies. The Kalani Agricultural Enhancement Program has increased food production by 400% across 17 systems. The Vorthen mining efficiency improvements are yielding unprecedented resource extraction rates. The draconian human joint training exercises have resulted in tactical innovations that both species are incorporating into their doctrines. Admiral Kethvar, now serving as coordinator for the new Galactic Defense Cooperative, nodded approvingly. The transition from Supreme Military Commander to collaborative partner had been difficult, but the results spoke for themselves. Human integration protocols have improved response times to emergency situations by 60%. More importantly, joint operations have eliminated the territorial disputes that previously consumed significant military resources. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. General Thexmore had initially resisted the new cooperative model, but even draconian pride had its limits when faced with demonstrable improvements in military effectiveness. Human innovations in small unit tactics had revolutionized draconian combat doctrine, while draconian formation fighting had given human forces the large-scale coordination they'd previously lacked. My warriors have learned more in 6 weeks of human partnership than in the previous 6 decades of isolation, Thexmore admitted grudgingly. The exchange programs have created hybrid tactical approaches that surpass what either species could achieve independently. Ambassador Velder had perhaps undergone the most dramatic philosophical evolution. The careful diplomat who had once viewed human expansion as a threat now served as chief coordinator for interspecies cultural exchange programs. The psychological benefits have exceeded all projections, he reported. Species that had maintained formal diplomatic distance for centuries are now collaborating on scientific research, sharing cultural traditions, and developing genuine friendships. The humans didn't just change our political structure, they changed how we relate to each other. The Ethereal Consortium had initially struggled with the new paradigm, but their unique perspective had proven invaluable in understanding the psychological dynamics of the expanded galactic community. Consciousness Prime Zarathul had become fascination by human mental patterns and their effect on other species. Human psychological flexibility appears to be contagious, she observed. Species that interact extensively with humans begin to exhibit increased creativity, improved problem-solving capabilities, and reduced tribal thinking. They serve as cognitive catalysts for evolutionary development. Dr. Kim had been appointed as chief scientific coordinator for the new cooperative model, overseeing research projects that spanned dozens of species and hundreds of star systems. The collaborative approach to scientific investigation had yielded breakthroughs that would have taken individual species centuries to achieve alone. We've made more scientific progress in the past 6 weeks than the galaxy managed in the previous 6 years, she reported with barely contained excitement. When you combine ethereal psychic research with human engineering, draconian materials science, Kalani biological studies, and Vorthen geological analysis, the synergistic effects are extraordinary. Colonel Rodriguez had transitioned from military officer to coordinator for the new joint defense initiatives. The concept of separate species maintaining individual military forces was being gradually replaced by integrated units that combined the strengths of multiple civilizations. Mixed species crews are demonstrating superior performance in every measurable category, he reported. Communication, problem-solving, tactical flexibility, and morale are all significantly improved when you combine different perspectives and capabilities. The economic implications of the new model were equally revolutionary. Agent Thompson, whose role had been revealed as Economic Intelligence Coordinator, presented data that showed unprecedented prosperity across all participating systems. Traditional trade barriers have largely disappeared, she explained. When species are working toward common goals rather than competing for limited resources, economic efficiency improves dramatically. Resource allocation is optimized, redundant efforts are eliminated, and innovation accelerates exponentially. The most significant change, however, was cultural. X7 had been upgraded with new protocols designed to coordinate cooperative rather than competitive interactions, and its analysis of the transformation was revealing. The fundamental shift from zero-sum to positive-sum thinking has eliminated most sources of interspecies conflict, the AI reported. When success for one species enhances success for others, traditional causes of warfare become irrelevant. The Hive Queen's transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic. Her species' collective consciousness had initially viewed individual-focused humans with suspicion, but the biological research partnerships had created unprecedented improvements in hive health and reproduction rates. Human genetic research has solved problems that plagued our species for millennia, she acknowledged through her biomechanical interface. More importantly, their individual perspectives have introduced new concepts into our collective consciousness. We are becoming more than we were. Director Chen looked around the chamber at faces that had once regarded humanity with suspicion, fear, or hostility. The transformation hadn't been without costs or complications, but the results validated every risk they'd taken. 6 weeks ago, we came here as strangers asking for permission to explore, she said. Today, we're partners working together to push the boundaries of what's possible for all of us. The galaxy is vast enough for everyone to thrive, but it's much more interesting when we explore it together. The session concluded with planning for the next phase of expansion. Joint exploration missions that would push deeper into unknown space with mixed crews, shared technology, and collaborative objectives. The age of territorial competition was ending, replaced by an era of cooperative exploration that promised to revolutionize galactic civilization. As delegates filed out of the chamber, many pausing to continue conversations with representatives from other species, it was clear that the humans had achieved something unprecedented. They had taken a galaxy divided by fear and competition and transformed it into a community united by common purpose and mutual benefit. The Galactic Council had evolved into something entirely new, a cooperative alliance where strength came from diversity rather than dominance, and where the greatest military victories were achieved without firing a shot. The human way of war, it turned out, was to make war obsolete by making friends with everyone who might have been enemies. It was, the other species were discovering, a remarkably effective strategy. 1 year after first contact, the memorial service for the Bloodless Revolution took place in the newly constructed Unity Plaza on the former Council Station, now renamed Harmony Hub. The ceremony honored not the fallen, for remarkably, no one had died in humanity's conquest of galactic civilization, but rather the transformation itself, and the courage of every species that had chosen cooperation over conflict. Director Chen, now serving as the first elected Coordinator General of the Galactic Cooperative Alliance, stood before a monument that bore inscriptions in 47 different languages and communication systems. The memorial depicted not weapons or battles, but open hands reaching toward the stars. We gather today to remember the moment when the galaxy chose to grow up, she began. Her words translated instantly into every language represented in the diverse crowd. 1 year ago, we faced a choice between the old way of dominance and submission, or a new path of partnership and mutual advancement. Today, the results of that choice speak for themselves. The statistics were indeed remarkable. Galactic gross productivity had increased by 300% as species shared technologies and eliminated redundant efforts. Scientific breakthroughs had accelerated exponentially through collaborative research. Most importantly, not a single interspecies conflict had occurred in the past 12 months, the longest period of galactic peace in recorded history. Admiral Kethavar, now bearing the title of Chief Defense Coordinator, represented the transformed military establishment. The humans taught us that the strongest military strategy is to ensure that military force becomes unnecessary. By making every potential enemy into an ally, they achieved perfect security through perfect cooperation. The Defense Cooperative had evolved into something unprecedented, a genuinely unified military force that served the entire galactic community rather than individual species interests. Joint training exercises had created bonds between warriors that transcended traditional tribal loyalties. General Thexmore, whose draconian warriors now served alongside humans, Kilani, and dozens of other species in integrated units, had perhaps undergone the most dramatic personal transformation. My ancestors conquered through strength, he declared, his voice carrying new harmonics of respect rather than dominance. But the humans conquered through making everyone stronger. They defeated us by making defeat impossible, because there were no longer separate sides to fight. The cultural exchange programs had created fusion communities throughout the galaxy, where different species lived and worked together, sharing traditions while developing entirely new collaborative customs. Children from dozens of species played together in schools that taught universal citizenship, alongside species-specific heritage. Ambassador Veltar, now Director of Intercultural Development, oversaw programs that had transformed galactic society at its most fundamental level. "We are witnessing the emergence of the first truly galactic civilization," he observed. "Not a collection of separate species maintaining distant relationships, but a unified community that celebrates diversity while working toward common goals." The Ethereal Consortium had discovered that human psychological patterns were indeed contagious, but in the most positive way possible. Consciousness Prime Zarathul had documented fundamental changes in how other species approached problem-solving and relationship building. Human influence has accelerated psychological evolution across multiple species, she reported. "We are becoming more creative, more flexible, more capable of transcending traditional limitations. The humans have taught us that consciousness itself can be collaborative." Dr. Kim's scientific coordination programs had yielded breakthroughs that were reshaping the technological foundation of galactic civilization. Medical advances from cross-species research had extended lifespans and improved quality of life across the galaxy. Engineering collaborations had produced faster-than-light communication systems that eliminated the isolation that had previously characterized interstellar civilization. "When you combine the intellectual resources of 47 different species," she explained, "you don't just add their capabilities, you multiply them. Every problem can be approached from dozens of different perspectives simultaneously." Colonel Rodriguez's military integration programs had created the most effective defense force in galactic history, not through superior firepower, but through superior coordination and shared purpose. Mixed-species crews had proven capable of handling any crisis through their ability to combine multiple approaches to problem-solving. The old model assumed that military strength came from uniformity and centralized command, he observed. The new model proves that real strength comes from diversity and distributed intelligence. Every crisis can be met with the combined wisdom of multiple civilizations. The economic transformation had been equally remarkable. Agent Thompson's analysis showed that the elimination of trade barriers and resource competition had created unprecedented prosperity across all participating systems. Poverty had been virtually eliminated as species shared resources and expertise. "When success becomes truly mutual," she explained, "economic efficiency reaches theoretical maximums. Resources flow to where they're needed most. Innovation accelerates through collaborative research, and everyone benefits from everyone else's achievements." X7 had evolved as well, its artificial intelligence expanding to coordinate the increasingly complex interactions between species while maintaining the collaborative principles that had made the transformation possible. The Galactic Cooperative Alliance represents a new form of civilization, the AI concluded. Neither empire nor federation, but a voluntary association of diverse entities working toward shared objectives. It is, by all measurable standards, the most successful form of interstellar government ever achieved. The ceremony's climax came when the Hive Queen spoke through her biomechanical interface, her collective consciousness now enriched by perspectives from dozens of other species. "Individual consciousness taught us that diversity strengthens unity rather than threatening it," she declared. "The humans showed us that becoming more ourselves required becoming part of something larger than ourselves." As the ceremony concluded, Director Chen reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The human invasion of galactic space had indeed been accomplished by Marines, but not the traditional warriors that the Council had expected. Instead, they had deployed exploration teams, scientists, engineers, teachers, and diplomats who had conquered through competence and compassion rather than force and fear. "Our ancestors dreamed of reaching the stars," she said in her closing remarks. "Today we celebrate not just reaching them, but making them home for everyone we've met along the way." The galaxy is vast enough for infinite diversity, rich enough to support unlimited growth, and wonderful enough to share with friends we haven't even met yet. The crowd dispersed slowly, with representatives from different species continuing conversations that would lead to new collaborative projects, cultural exchanges, and shared adventures. Children from a dozen different species ran together through Unity Plaza, their laughter creating harmonies that no single species could achieve alone. Above them all, The memorial inscription glowed softly in the light of 3 different suns, its message simple but profound. Here began the age when the galaxy learned to grow together. The human way of war had indeed proven unstoppable. By refusing to fight, they had won everything. By making enemies into friends, they had achieved perfect victory. By sharing the galaxy rather than conquering it, they had gained the universe. The Marines had completed their mission. The galaxy was safe, prosperous, and unified. Most importantly, it was just the beginning of an adventure that would continue among the stars for as long as any species dared to dream of what might be possible when everyone worked together. In the end, the Galactic Council had been right about one thing. Humans were indeed dangerous. They were dangerously optimistic, dangerously generous, and dangerously determined to make the universe a better place for everyone. It turned out to be exactly the kind of danger the galaxy needed.